So this is Mentorship as an on-ramp to open source contributions. Yeah, we're really excited to have everyone here. I will quickly introduce myself and then I'll have everyone go down and introduce themselves. My name's Tyler. I am the CEO of the nonprofit Code Day, and we focus on helping students get experience in making their first open source contributions. We have like a 1 month, 1 month long, basically 3 weeks of really serious work on good first issue style issues. And through that work, I've been really lucky to meet Kevin, Kendall, and Emily. So I'll let them introduce themselves and a little bit about their program.
Hi, my name is Kevin Wang, and I'm the founder of the Mentors in Tech program. We help students from overlooked and underserved community colleges, and usually those students are attending schools that are less well known but affordable and accessible, and they're usually pivoting into a career in tech from something else, and so we help them with career navigation, embedded capstones in their classes in open source, and also we work with employers to help them understand the unique strengths and backgrounds of our students and help them hire our students.
Hi everyone, I am Kendall Nelson. I'm a senior upstream developer advocate at the Open Infrastructure Foundation. So we're a nonprofit that hosts open source projects focused on infrastructure. You may have guessed it from the name. Very original. But what I do is facilitate relationships between a variety of universities inside the United States and slowly growing the numbers outside the United States to get open source projects in front of students while they're in university. Ooh, that was fun. That was fun. And so we find projects in our open source communities for students to work on, and then I coordinate with the professors to have students work on them for a semester or as an internship. Lots of different things, lots of flexibility, lots of fun.
Hi everyone, my name's Emily Lovell. I'm a postdoctoral fellow at UC Santa Cruz in our open source program office. So we are one of a small but growing cohort of academic OSPOs figuring out what's useful to all the different functions that we can serve to the folks on our campus who are interested in open source or already doing open source work. Our office does a lot to support student interest in open source, and my background is in teaching computer science. I've taught open source courses before coming to UCSC. And in particular, right now we have 2 summer mentorship programs that run in parallel. Two types of open source mentorship programs, I would say, that run in parallel. One is modeled on the Google Summer of Code, or GSOC model, where we have many remote contributors, new contributors from all around the world working on academic open source research projects. So it's pretty cool that they're getting hands-on experience with open source and also academic research. And then the second, and that one is largely coordinated by Stephanie Ligi, who's our executive director. She's in the audience. We also have a newer program that we're about to go into year 3, in which we host students from historically Black colleges and universities to make their first contribution to open source software. That's a program that I lead that runs as an 8-week summer program that's 50% in person and 50% remote. We work with a specific small cohort of HBCUs to bring their students to our campus and work together, and then contribute to external open source projects once they learn the basic skills and tools to do that. Yeah, I think that's it.
Cool, thank you. So the first question I have is just on the purpose of mentorship in general. I think as many of us have experienced, there's a lot of great resources out there online. Even now with ChatGPT, there's lots of ways that you can learn on your own. What is the importance of mentorship? Why do we do mentorship programs at all?
So I'll start. I think a lot of open source communities are vast, and there's a lot that is not written into the documentation. There's a lot of tribal knowledge, and knowing somebody and having a person there to ask your questions to instead of the entire community, which can be very daunting for people, whether English is their first language or not. Having that extra little bit of support can be really, really invaluable. especially when you're uncomfortable, you're new to it. So having a mentor is really what makes it work, I think, a lot of the time.
I would add also just like for us, and I think the same is true for Kevin. Like we work with a lot of these schools where the students are non-traditional backgrounds in tech in a lot of different ways, and it's just really scary for them to do something real, especially with something like contributing to open source. It is actually you're shipping code to a bunch of people, and it's easier for a lot of our students to say, yeah, my skills aren't ready yet. Like I'll try this next year or something like that. And having someone there to support you is, even just the having someone there to just give you the thumbs up can be enough to sort of overcome that emotional barrier.
Yeah, I think to just piggyback on that, like through our work, we find just the impact of students seeing somebody like model what it is like to work in a really large code base where you don't understand most of the code, especially initially, and that like it's okay and very normal to be lost, and like how do you find resources, and like how do you figure out who you should talk to, and like then like what do those messages look like? So I think like through mentorship, like our small cohort spend a lot of time like sitting together going like, okay, we're gonna draft our first Slack message to the community together, things like that. And then there's of course just a really big impact of seeing people that look like you and have similar, experiences and identity overlap that I think is also really important for students. And then the last thing I'll say is I think, relating to that first point about seeing what it is like to look lost or realistically work in software, open source software, the feedback I get from students, like every time they meet a like real world open source developer for the first time, is they're just like, oh my gosh, they're just normal people, which I think we all see that in our work, and like, I just don't think it can be overstated, like the actual impact of that on like our next generation of open source contributors, to see that, yeah, I think it's actually very helpful for them to ask, some developer at Google who's contributing to open source how to do something and see that person say, I have no idea. Like, that's really important and powerful for them.
There's so much unspoken things about the software development process. You can read all the books on software engineering, but if you put that person in a software engineering process, they probably will not do well. So that's why internships exist. That's why all of these things that companies do exist. How does the process work end to end, how they're connected? What are some norms and expectations that are completely unspoken that you get from, quote unquote, the water cooler? Professional skills, things like, if you want to have a meeting, you should probably go talk to them, like use calendaring software, right? Find a time that's acceptable to everyone. Hit accept if you get, like there's tons and tons of these things that are not taught in schools, and it's not in software engineering, software engineering books. It's not taught anywhere. You only learn it when you're actually in it. How do you ask questions in the right way so that it's the most productive way to ask a question, and not have people, seeing, things like, wow, this, and still want to work with you in a nice way, right? Get to where you want to get to. How do you say no also? So how do you say no in a productive? That's really true for entry-level folks. They don't know because the power structure and, management, all that stuff. They don't know how to say no in a way that's productive, or maybe they're overloaded, or how do you ask for help, right? So all of these things, you need a mentor in these very particular situations to help you in software development, in your career. These are all super important things that if we want more people to be involved in open source software development, that the newer contributors will all need to have to keep the ecosystem healthy, and also, for all of these projects to thrive.
Yeah, and just speaking of unspoken things, I remember we're all here at this conference today, and like we try to bring students to conferences a lot. And I remember recently, like, one of our students went to a conference for his first conference, and afterward he was like, you know, I was surprised that people made jokes there. It's one of those things that is like so completely obvious to us that, like, you know, this is just fun and it's a social thing, and like people don't know things like that, and how many of those issues come up in other places. I think, Kevin, for you and I, for our students, I think calendar software is probably the biggest one. But yeah, a lot of those are definitely ring true. So, you know, that's the kind of, you know, talking a lot about the importance of mentoring in general. What makes open source unique as far as tech mentorship, and why are we working in open source? I mean, all of us are passionate about this. Why are we passionate about this?
Yeah, I can start. I am really passionate about engaging students in open source for, I guess, a number of reasons that I'm sure overlap the rest of the panel, but I think an obvious one maybe is that it creates a public portfolio of work for those students, and that seems like increasingly important. Like, people are putting their GitHub handles on their CVs or their resumes now, or being asked for those. So I think it's really powerful for students to just have a place to point where someone can go and see, like, what code they've worked on, you know, what projects they've worked on, the nature of how they communicate with other people professionally, since they're also, you know, all these comments on their pull requests will be public as well, or in Slack channels. So I think that's really important. I think that there's a lot of potential for students to grow their network really rapidly through, again, doing like outward-facing open work. And getting to grow their network to include people who work all different kinds of places that they could learn from or might want to work in the future. And then the last thing I'll say is, I think for my students especially, I think about the importance of community and like belonging in computer science. And I think I didn't really feel like I belonged in computer science before I found open source. And finding a place where like community was valued and treating each other with kindness and recognition and appreciation was really valued. So I think that resonates with at least some of my students as well, that particular piece of community and being able to have positive impact on the world.
All of what she said. I 100% agree, but everything from like the direct benefits that students have as a result of being able to point at, I did this thing, this is how I collaborated, to I collaborated with this person that's on the other side of the world, and maybe like our priorities weren't exactly the same, but we were able to work together on an implementation and figure it out. Like, that's a skill that is invaluable and not something that really gets taught in university, especially because a lot of the times you're working in isolation. So open source gives you a like real world experience without having to be backed by a company as an intern or an employee. There's so much opportunity and there's so much diversity within the breadth of open source projects that are available that you're going to find something that you're interested in. Like, if you go look, there's going to be something there. And once you find your place in that community, having the network to just continue working in that community but bouncing to different companies, I've seen a lot of that too. So it's like the benefits are endless.
Yeah, I love what you said also about the like finding something that's meaningful to you, right? I think that is one of the really big benefits of open source, and there's a lot of research in humanitarian open source software just showing like if students are doing something that is meaningful to them, that is and meaningful to their community and is making, you know, a positive impact in the world, whatever that means to them, like that is really, really heavily motivating. So I agree. I mean, I think that's super, super unique. We've had students who've, you know, actually as part of people I met at Scale last year, we've had students who've shipped some code on NASA projects, and like how cool is that to be able to say that you have code that, you know, is eventually, if not currently, like going to make it to space. Like, that's just such a unique opportunity. So yeah, I mean, being able to find a project that's meaningful to you is really super valuable. Kevin?
And in addition to, I think, meaning for a lot of students, a lot of our students from smaller, accessible, affordable colleges have a wide range of backgrounds and expertise and work experience. And so they can find the right project for them that's meaningful to them, big or small, and, you know, all all of the different variety of projects out there. And also, open source, to be able to work on an open source project, it is not gated by a elite internship from a elite company where software development sometimes is gated by the name brand of the college you go to. And that comes with a lot of implications of a lot of other things. And it helps our students, without having access to those elite institutions, to legitimize the skill set that they have without the brand, without the benefit of having gone to a brand name college or university and show themselves publicly what they're capable of. So I think it's equally about access and one of the few remaining places where students can really demonstrate what they do, whatever the access.
Cool. So to get into a little bit more of the details about how some of these programs work, there's a lot of different programs. I think we all have different ways of doing this, and that's part of why this has been such a successful long-term collaboration, is we all have kind of a different approach, and there's advantages to each. There's also a lot of other great things out there, Outreachy, MLH fellowships, the Linux Foundation has a mentorship program as well. Can you talk just in more detail about each of the programs? How do they work, and just kind of what differentiates your program from all the other ways of doing it?
Yeah, so we are all very different, like you said. So I really represent the open source projects, first and foremost. I have been a contributor to OpenStack since 2015, I think, so about 10 years, but I've also been involved in other open source projects, and so I have that context, and I know, oh man, I'm getting all in front of myself. So the University Partnership Program is a collaboration from the project standpoint with universities. So our goal is to get open source in general in front of as many students as possible. And so how that works for us has been really organic. Over time, we have been introduced to a number of universities and faculty and professors that have computer science courses that could be focused on cloud computing or virtual machines specifically, or open source generally. And usually those courses have some sort of semester-long project. And so I go to our open source communities and I find pieces of work that would be good for students to work on. And I also find mentors in our community that are willing to spend a couple hours a week kind of helping them along and making them feel comfortable to be able to get that work done. So they're helping the project. They are accomplishing something that maybe we don't have time to do, but have time to mentor somebody in doing. And yeah, it's gone really well. We've branched out to about a dozen universities in the US now that run different times a year. And we have one university in Seoul that we're starting to work with, so I'm really excited about that and hope to get more universities in Europe. But that's been hard because my context is I went to school in the US, so I know how the US college system works approximately, but it's definitely different in other countries, so that's something that we're working on, but yeah.
Sure, so as I mentioned before, we have essentially two main mentorship tracks that run in the summer through UC Santa Cruz. One is the Open Source Research Experience, or OSRE, and that's the program that's modeled largely after Google Summer of Code, although we do have some in-person students, or students who are local. And we have students work on all different kinds of projects for that. The main theme is that they're academic research projects. So some of them tend to be smaller projects or earlier in their development than maybe working on like Firefox dev tools or some big project. But students are getting this really unique experience working on academic research. So that's a distinguishing feature of that particular mentorship program. And that program has grown to like 40-some contributors, I think now, each summer that we work with over the past 10 years. No, not that long. I thought it was that long. 2008? Okay, I was going to say, wow, 7 years. Okay, so yeah, we've grown to include 40-some contributors in that program. So that's been quite successful. And some of those students have gone on to mentor in future years. Like contributors have turned into mentors, have turned into PhD students. So that's been like a pretty neat conversion out of that program. And then the other program is called Contributor Catalyst. That's our HBCU facing program, where we host students from historically black colleges and universities to work, to come to our campus for 4 weeks and then work together remotely for 4 weeks. And that's really a start from scratch program where they're learning everything about open source tooling and norms and all these unspoken things we're talking about. They make LinkedIn profiles and fill out their GitHub READMEs. And for that program, this is our 3rd year, and we are growing. We started with one HBCU, Norfolk State University, who helped us to design the program to serve sort of their students' prerequisites and needs. And this year we're going to include a second HBCU, Southern University in Louisiana, and then over the next couple years we'll be expanding to a handful of additional schools. And really that program focuses on like bringing students in small groups from their university, since there's like a lot of just cultural differences between the East Coast and the Southeast, where a lot of HBCUs are concentrated, versus California. We also use peer mentoring in that program, so we have alumni come back and help mentor their peers in future years, which has been really successful. And yeah, those students, they choose what project they want to contribute to, and it's often something that I have no experience with, and I like learn on the fly with them. So it's a big adventure, but we like emphasize like the fun and learning that comes with that. And I do coach them how to sort of make educated guesses at projects that will be welcoming to newcomers, and then establish contacts there. And that program also has yielded some productive outcomes. We are now, we got NSF, National Science Foundation funding to grow that program based on the early pilot success. And those students have gone on to like be on podcasts and speak at conferences and get job offers that they think the program really helped them to secure, and even to do some paid work in open source by invitation. So yeah, small program, but both of those programs have grown well.
And Emily, and I think someone else referenced this earlier, you referenced Google Summer of Code. How many people here are familiar with Google Summer of Code? Okay, so most people, cool. Yeah, that's great. I think that was probably one of the earliest examples of the sort of programs that we built out, so that's great to see.
Mentors in Tech, what we do is we help students from overlooked and underserved juniors and seniors in smaller, less well-known, but also affordable and accessible, flexible CS programs, navigate the whole tech hiring landscape and help them land their first job. We do that in 3 different ways. One is career mentoring through each student having a couple of industry mentors, and it's super structured, and they have a topic every month that they discuss over the school year, from how tech does hiring to resume and technical interview prep and STAR interviews and everything. So lots and lots of topics to start from the very beginning to help our students understand what that looks like and what they need to do. We also work with Code Day on capstone projects, embedded capstone projects in the classroom. That's open source, where the students get a chance to make significant contributions to an open source project with the help of industry mentors. And lastly, we work with industry folks and companies who we help them understand and recognize the unique backgrounds and strength of our students and think about how they can hire them and meet their talent needs. Majority of the average age of our students is 30. They're usually pivoting from retail work, food and beverage service, the military, mothers coming back from being a stay-at-home mom, rejoining the workforce, and any and everything in between. And we help them understand how the whole, we help them get that incredibly important very first job in tech. So that's what we do. And each one of those things I just mentioned have 90,000 different details and fun stories about how all of these come about and all of the situations we have run into. But it's been thanks to about all of the mentors we have had. We have about 150 industry mentors who are giving time to our students, and we partner with community and technical colleges in Washington State, in California, in New York to serve those students. And usually those students are the farthest away from opportunity. And so, yeah, that's why we do what we do.
Yeah, and I'll sort of speak for Code Day here. With Code Day, we've been working very closely with Mint for many years, and we really work a lot on trying to get students into their first open source contribution. So a lot of the students who do the capstone that we do in collaboration with Mint, or the students who are doing our micro internships, which are these kind of month-long, 10 to 20 hour a week experiences doing like a good first issue. They've never done any open source stuff before, and a lot of our students, in fact, have literally never done anything in their entire educational career that they hadn't previously been expected to know from reading a textbook. And so this is the very first time that they are going out and trying to do something that no one knows the answer to, and that's super scary for them because we frequently will get complaints from students who are like, well, I'm not sure what to do, and I asked my mentor, and she doesn't know what to do either. And it's like, well, great, that's kind of how it works. That's, none of us are going to be paid, the salaries that programmers are paid if we have someone who knows exactly how to do what we need to do step by step, every step of the way. That, this is what the job is. It's figuring things out. And so, like, for us, a lot of what we've tried to do is build up a program that's focused around teaching students those skills to work independently, and then pass them on to really awesome other programs, or just have them continue to contribute to those communities on their own without quite as much support from us, but hopefully after having those skills, they do that. And one of the reasons actually we work so closely with Mint is because that other stuff that's sort of the non-technical mentoring is equally as important, because a lot of students are leaving our program and they think, well, I spent 4 weeks working on this, and I only ended up writing 5 lines of code, so that means I totally failed. And having a mentor that you're familiar with, that you can go back on and reflect on this with, and say, have them say, well, yeah, but sometimes figuring out which 5 lines of code to write and where to write them is actually 95% of the work, and that's what it's like. Having someone who can sort of be that partner with you for that discussion and like reflect on that is kind of a big part of it too. So been really lucky to have almost all of our students are going through Mint as well, and to have that support.
One small anecdote. I totally, I might have been in one of our like meetings and discussions, but I heard that students thought of like the percentage of unit tests that pass and come back. If it's like above a certain threshold, it's okay. Or like in our projects, if it doesn't pass 100% of the tests, it doesn't get merged. And they're like, oh, well, I got like 70%. That's like a C, right? Oh, that's great. That's passing in terms of grades, maybe, but not as far as code being merged.
Yeah, that's definitely funny. So actually, on that sort of note, thinking about some of the problems that we face with all of our programs, especially from a student perspective, what are the sort of outstanding problems in getting students involved in open source? And especially if you can't share any more anecdotes, I think they're always kind of interesting.
Oh, man. Does anybody else want to go first? I don't. It's a very lengthy list. The number of things I get, well, for students in our programs, they're taking other courses. They're not just taking the one to work on the open source project. And working on an open source project can take up as much time as you're willing to invest in it. So balancing that with like the other courses that they're taking is really difficult for a lot of them, because they'll like be really dedicated for like 2-3 days, and then they fall off the face of the map for like 2 weeks because they're focused on other things. Maybe they have projects or finals or whatever, and that's totally understandable. But that does make it really hard to be consistent in building skills and like responding to comments on your patches and getting them updated. But the other thing that we see as being very difficult is like time zones. The world's not flat, apparently. And so when you have students in Doha trying to work with mentors that are in Seattle, that time zone overlap is not great. And the amount of support that the mentors want to be able to offer to the students is like at odds with sleep schedules sometimes. So yeah, that's definitely one that I don't know that we'll ever really have a...
Use the Outlook time zone checkbox.
Yeah, World Time Buddy is like my favorite tool, even as an established contributor, because keeping track of time zones is the worst.
we had like our code day email. We have like an automated email that goes out, and we would always write in it, you know, please specify your time zones when you say when you're available, and then we made it bold, and now it's bold, all uppercase. Yeah,
Yeah,
time zones are a big problem.
yeah. That's why we just do everything in UTC, right? Yeah. Everybody loves UTC. Oh yeah, also daylight savings time, and that it happens differently in different continents,
And
or
in different U.S. states.
and in U.S. Yeah, some states. Oh man, I'd love to be Arizona.
The time zone availability is a big one for, sorry, not time zone, the general availability is a big one for a lot of Kevin and my students too. A lot of our students work a second job to pay for schools, to pay for their schooling. A lot of them are caretakers for their family, and so yeah, I mean, even one of the big advantages to open source, I think, for us is that it's accessible to some extent to those students, because those students who are like a primary caretaker for their family, they can't take a traditional internship. Or if they're working a part-time job and that's how they're paying for their schooling, you know, if they can't quit that for 3 months and then go take an internship and then just go beg for your job back.
Yeah, we literally just talked to at the booth, a UC Berkeley undergraduate who she just graduated, and she had an internship at one of the big tech companies, and she was invited back, but only in person in the Pacific Northwest, but she lives down here. So she had to turn down on that offer and continue to look for jobs here. So she was asking us for advice. So there's tons of that kind of, you know, we talk about how software is used by millions and millions of people and all of that stuff. But when it really comes down to it, it's student by student. Everyone has different circumstances that we need to help them the best way that we can. And the other thing, I think, especially with more students coming in that are beyond digital natives at this point, their life, especially, you know, since the pandemic, has been with things that are on demand, whether it's Netflix or Amazon delivery or Uber Eats or all of those things. Sometimes they forget, even though in open source, in software development, it's a screen, they sometimes forget there's a real human being behind that. So the expectations of how to communicate and collaborate, I think we have to teach even more so and help them understand there's another, even though it's just text like anything else, there's a real person behind that, and how do you collaborate with a real person that is not, you know, click and something happens and sets off a chain of events, that the people you collaborate also has like a life and, you know, have work, family, kids, etc., and things that, you know, that happen. It's sometimes our students forget that because, like anything, they're so used to interacting with a smartphone or something on a desktop and click and you get that instant gratification. Sometimes our students forget that, and, you know, and that's just one of the many, many things that I think we have to remind our students.
Yeah. One of the instructors that I work with who's also involved in our our group, Stephen Wally, in his email signature, he's like, my time zone is not your time zone, and I might not get this email until the next day, or maybe I'm traveling or whatever. And I think that that's a really good reminder just across the industry that everybody should have. So it kind of goes with that struggle of lives clashing and everything.
Yeah, I think another sort of cross-industry challenge that I can highlight is like acronyms and all these like niche knowledge. Yeah, I see some reactions. You know, one example that has come up with my students is like LGTM, which you might be familiar with as looks good to me, or let's get this merged. My students saw that for the first time and they were like, let's get that money? Like, you know? And like, there's actually, I met someone recently who gave a talk about this particular, that was sort of centered on this particular same anecdote at All Things Open that I think is online if you're interested in hearing more about that. But yeah, this is like an example, right, of there's so many things that like you can interpret differently whether you're like a member of sort of the classic tech majority group or not, or you might have different context for. So I think, you know, that's again, I think mentorship can have a place for our students to be like, what the heck is this, you know? And I find that I have like a really different nature of relationship and like a mentorship capacity than I did when I was teaching in a classroom. So I think, you know, if you are a mentor or an educator mentor, it creates space for those things to surface, you know, for you to be able to talk about them. The other thing that is a challenge in sort of the area that I mostly work in is, you know, students will come and they'll do a program like this, and some of you are already working on this issue directly, but students might come and have this experience and come away from it saying like, ugh, I wish this was in like more of my classes, or I wish this was in my degree program. Like, this is very useful stuff. And I think that is also a challenge, both in terms of like convincing departments and institutions that these things have value. Some of you have already been very successful in doing that. I've taught in a department that was very supportive, and I've also faced resistance, you know, from other faculty in different departments that have said like, you know, I give them the whole pitch of like how important this is and why we're doing this work and the impact, like the profound impact that it's having on students in very measurable ways, and then might have a faculty member return, you know, and say to me something like, oh, but it sounds like students aren't writing like that much code. And I'm like, well, that's not the point. Like, they have all their other classes that they can be writing lots and lots of lines of code. This is different for a reason. So I think that that is a challenge. And then also just, you know, faculty maybe don't have time or experience with open source, sort of expanding our capacity, you know, nationwide, worldwide, to support faculty who like might want to teach with these things and just haven't had the opportunity. And for that, I will give a plug that there's a workshop called the Professor's Open Source Software Experience, or POSSE. That's a National Science Foundation workshop. It's how I learned initially to teach open source many years ago. And the workshops are starting back up. The next one's in May. And if you want to participate, or you know someone who might want to participate, it's a funded opportunity for US faculty. And please ask me more about it. I'd love to tell you.
The only thing I'd add is, like, yeah, I mean, I think like a lot of it is just translating between the academic experience. A lot of the problems that our students have is just kind of translating what they're doing with what they're experienced with in the classroom. I think similar to what you're saying, like, you know, a lot of students expect that their success is valued by the number of lines of code. A lot of students think that their success is valued by, do they know what lines of code to write, right? In school, if you struggle, that means that you're not passing the test, right? You're supposed to know the answer right away, and not knowing the answer right away is a really big challenge. So I think the biggest thing for us is just, it's not been that hard for us to get students to make one open source pull request. I think over 90% of our students make their first open source pull request. The challenge has been getting them to stick around, because so many of them think that they didn't do a good job because it wasn't what they were used to from most of their classes. Or even to put it on a resume or to talk about it in an interview. I mean, we've had students contribute to really amazing projects. Their code is in use by hundreds of thousands of people, and they didn't have it on their resume because they didn't feel like they did a good enough job in that experience. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that for us, that's the challenge, is just contextualizing what happens.
Yeah, I just want to add to that. I see the same thing with my students, and in particular, one thing that I see that I think is common to all of us probably is a student will maybe submit their patch or their pull request, and they're like, did it, I'm done. And then maybe a maintainer comes back with feedback, which is like the coolest thing ever, that these people are investing time in helping my students learn. And I think it's a very different model than taking a class. And so students sometimes kind of panic in that moment. They're like, oh, like I did it wrong. Or maybe because there was back and forth before the PR was ultimately merged, they feel like ashamed to put that in the open or share that with people and tell them. And I'm like, no. That's the success. That's the success, is that you saw it through, you came back and kept engaging in that conversation until your PR was merged or your patch was accepted. And like, that's what people in the field are gonna see and recognize. So like, I think it's a perceptions challenge, right?
Yeah, and we actually went and, well, one of our partners went and has gone to a bunch of tech meetups and just talked with hiring managers and just asked them, like, what would be impressive to you if you saw it on a resume? And they're not looking for, the people that just have 1 or 2 pull requests. They're looking for, like, the discussion and the participation in the community and helping out with code reviews for other people's things and, taking the feedback and integrating that. So it's so funny because it's just not the way that students are, traditionally evaluated.
Yeah, it's hard to grade communication and collaboration, but you can more easily grade, oh, it passed the test, or
Right.
whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to take some time for audience questions in just a second, but before we do that, any sort of parting words for things that you've learned or things that you'd like to share that the open source community could do better to to help our students get involved in the community?
I think one of us always mentions that if anybody's aware of a hidden pot of money, please tell us. Because we all, I think, are like furiously constantly writing grants and talking to our governments and things to try and fund this work because we think it's so important. But I think that I would love to see like industry especially invest in this work more. Like we, through being an academic OSPA, we talk with a lot of amazing industry collaborators who do a lot to support us. And we hear feedback from them that part of the value that we offer is by doing these sorts of programs. And we do have some industry collaborators who financially support them. But I think that, it's everywhere in open source, right? We would all like to see people put money on the dependencies that they rely on. And I think mentorship programs are the same. Like that we're really passionate about this work. We want to keep doing it. We think it's really important. We see the value to everyone in the community, but it's expensive. So if you have a secret, tell us.
No? I think we're ready for questions, unless you have anything else, Tyler?
I'll just kind of second what Emily said, just in terms of also like folks talking to their companies, talking to HR departments, recruiters, things like that, trying to get them to understand what this is and why it's important is also really helpful because we want our students to get jobs. That's great for everyone. So yeah, that's
We want
great.
them to stay in open source. Yeah.
Yes, I'm sorry to interrupt the questions, but I want to make one plug before people maybe trickle out if they do during the questions, which is that we have a cross-sector interest group, which is kind of how we all connected loosely. And it's a group of people who are doing mentorship work in open source or want to be doing mentorship work in open source, who gather once a month on Zoom. It's a pretty low time commitment, but a place where we can all pool our expertise or requests for the community. And our next meeting is going to be on Monday, this coming Monday at 11 a.m. Pacific time. And any of us can connect you with how to get plugged in with that. Or I think the QR code there might also go to our Discord server.
If you click on the QR code or if you scan the QR code, can I zoom? No. The QR code, oh, I can, it's just really slow. QR code down here in this corner will, okay, I'm just going to zoom back out. I don't, I don't like what's happening here. The QR code down there will take you to a link tree. You can click on the Discord to register for the calls. And I think there's also links to more information about all of our programs as well.
Yeah, and we do things like we organize panels of people to talk at conferences to represent these efforts and get more people involved. We are working on pulling together an event for people to come and workshop, how to pool our expertise towards things like funding or future events, best practices. So yeah, there's a lot of interesting stuff happening there.
Yeah, and anyone who's involved in open source projects or might want to be a mentor for one of these, we'd also love to hear from you. But yeah, the Discord is a great thing, and the calls are super awesome. So do go ahead and scan that QR code and scroll down near the bottom. There's a link to the Discord. So yeah, we'd love to take some questions. I think we have a volunteer here with the microphone. Awesome, and then we can share this one.
So I work with developers and product owners and QA and designers. You've talked about mentoring people who make code contributions. Is there any sense that maybe people have other skills that they can contribute to documentation or automated tests or something?
Yeah, definitely. Within the open source projects that I represent, we even need translations. If people know other other languages, that's really helpful. Definitely always need documentation. Oh yeah, translations is like really interesting. But yeah, documentation, just it's endless. Like the infrastructure to run the tools that support our open source communities. We also need like those sorts of admins too, and there's a wealth of experience to be learned from the people that we have doing those roles right now, and they would also be interested in doing mentorship. So
That reminds me, I always think it's kind of interesting, I think the documentation is kind of perpetually out of date in most projects. At least some aspect of it is, sort of perpetually out of date, and it's always kind of funny that almost every project, the students will struggle to get something to build properly, and then at the end of it, we're like, well, you could also submit a pull request for this. But I think general problem in open source, people, I think, undervalue the work on documentation. So yeah, I do think documentation is a big part of that.
So part of our mentorship program is to help students understand there's more than a software engineering role in tech. And because our students come from such different backgrounds, we try to encourage them to think more about than software engineering, that one role. A lot of students haven't heard anything else, and if they kind of like computer science, they're like, I want to be a full stack, engineer. If they're like, I don't like to talk to people that much, I'll be a back-end engineer. If you're slightly artsy, you're like, I want to be a front-end engineer. Or like that's kind of like how their concept of like the tech industry as a whole. So part of our mentorship program is to help students to understand, especially the ones that have so much really interesting background and experiences, to not throw that away, but incorporate that in their pivot into tech. We have folks that have a graduate degree in English, technical writing, a couple other things. If you worked in customer service in the past, dealing with customers in retail, you have a patience of a saint. So customer success engineer might be the role for you. Or if you were, sales engineering, or if you're a veteran, you're cool under pressure. Site reliability engineer, right? So there's a bunch of these things that we help our students think of, not just what they come in with thinking, understanding all of the different career opportunities that their unique skill set are a strength and an asset to them.
Yeah, I think to that point, I don't need to sell you all on open source. You're here at scale, but I think that's like another reason open source is such a cool place to do this work, is because a student can go and see what it feels like to do a little bit of design work or a little bit of tech writing work without having to take a full tech writing internship or a full design internship. So I think, it's a really great question, and I think we all think about this. We have students at UC Santa Cruz or through our programs who work on everything from design to, all my students work on docs. I require them to work on docs, actually, because I think it's so important.
And it helps them very quickly see the value of their work too, because the community is like, thank you, you know, if you'd like to keep working on our docs, here's like 10 issues. So they all work on docs. I've also had students work on translation, which has been very cool for them to use maybe a native language to improve a project, or they're, you know, being bilingual. And I've also had students work on curriculum. Last year, my students were really interested in security. OpenSSF was doing some curriculum work, and that was what drew them. So, yeah, I think it's a really good point and something that we could be, you know, it's good to be intentional about surfacing in these types of programs and settings.
Hello. I've heard you talk a lot about how you're working with the students, but what I'm most curious about is part of what you're doing as the mentorship program is, are you teaching people in open source projects how to be mentors and then sending students to them? Is that how that works? Or tell me how that exactly works.
I suspect it's different for all of our programs. So in our projects, there are, like, basically I go and I'm like, does anybody want to work with students in the upcoming semester? And then I give them as many details as I have from the professor, which may or may not be a whole lot of detail about like the level of skills that the students have. But usually I try to get at least 2 like community members signed up to be mentors so that they can also like peer mentor each other in the mentoring process. And I've been incredibly fortunate to see a few sub-projects even like kind of create, like mentor the mentors while they're mentoring the mentees. And it's like this crazy self-enforcing, excellent, I would call it a vicious cycle, but like in a good way. So it's really different. Virtuous cycle. Oh, that was a good one. I like that. That's very smart, very clever. So yeah, I say we don't really train our mentors, they train each other. But we do try to share knowledge and experience and context as much as possible amongst each other so that the quality of the experience for students goes up over time.
I think Code Day is as far on the sort of other side of the spectrum as you can get on this. We have kind of an interesting thing. So again, we're trying to teach students how to be self-sufficient to some extent and to break out of the cycle of studying for tests and really learn to work on their own when no one knows the answer to something. So we used to get mentors who were experienced in the open source project, and we found that those students actually did worse. So now we're actually looking for mentors who have no experience in the open source project. And you're just kind of there as a sounding board for the students to say, here's what I think is going on. And you can say, I've never seen this code base either, but when I look at this code, here's what I see. And you're kind of teaching them those skills. But again, you know, I mean, ours is really focused on those good first issues. We're not really focused as much on the other parts of it. And I think like one thing we would like to do is work more closely with these projects so that once the students finish it, they do have a little bit more of the subject matter expert mentorship from the project maintainers.
And we approach it in a slightly other end of the spectrum. We provide a lot of structure. It's our students' first time sort of outside of the classroom. They're used to classroom structure, expectations, and things like that. So our students have expectations and they're trained on how to be a good mentee. Likewise, same side or different, the other side of the same coin would be our mentors are also trained on how to be a good mentor and what their expectations are, how to engage with the student, or if things come up, how to engage with us or the faculty. And you know, there's a lot of intentional programmatic elements that were built to support faculty, student, and the mentors, and we support all 3 sort of in the background the entire time. So it's not a fire and forget kind of situation. We make sure that things are always going well. Just like any project, things happen, and sometimes we just have to kind of figure out what the best way of unblocking it and get things back on track, or there's misunderstandings or miscommunications and things like that. So we're emotional support and things like that, and things happen, you know, during the school year too. So We just do everything we can to make sure everyone is supported throughout the whole time, because it is, after all, their first time doing something completely new.
Yeah, for us, it's a mix depending on the program. So our academic research-focused program, I would say mentors get access to resources on like how to be a good mentor, and they have a community of, they have like a Slack community. They can bounce ideas off each other, talk through challenging situations. And then Stephanie, who directs that program, also provides a lot of ad hoc support, like if something comes up or an emergency happens. For our HBCU-facing program that has a lot of in-person time, the peer mentors for that, I mean, we're still growing the capacity for that program, but it's a lot of more like coaching for me to support peer mentors within the program. And then with regard to the actual communities, I would say since students choose the project for that, I'm not, I don't know ahead of time like who we're going to be working with, and we sort of enter a community in a very like in the wild sort of a way of working. But I do see my role there as being sort of a buffer liaison where I can reach out to maintainers within the community and check whether they have the capacity to support my students or in the way that I think would be particularly high impact for them. And then I also just listen and get a lot of feedback from them on like what would make those collaborations smoother. Which in the past has been like doing stand-up calls periodically or things like that. I will say, I think your question is a great one because we, in our monthly calls, this is like a resurfacing topic of people saying like, oh, I'm a maintainer of such and such community, or my friend maintains this community and they want to start a program, but they just don't have a lot of experience mentoring new contributors in the community. Where do they start? And so far, if you like join one of those calls, we could all info dump a bunch of resources on you, but there's not like a great central place. But that is something that we're thinking about and working on. And if you're interested in that, we'd love to talk more with you because I think there's a demand for that. And there's so much expertise already. There's a lot of people that we collaborate with who aren't here at scale, who are running all different kinds and scales of programs where they do different types of training for mentors within community. Or maintainers within communities, yeah.
Yeah, I think we have 2 minutes left. Sometimes a really quick question, we could get to it otherwise.
Yeah. Otherwise, it'll have to be the hallway track.
I know, yeah. But thank you very much for what you guys are doing. It's an amazing thing. As a software engineer myself, open source, like we need mentors and all that. But my question is like, you keep on mentioning students. I'm trying to understand the definition of a student. That do you need to be coming from a school, in a school program, or can you be anybody that you are self-teaching yourself and you want to get like mentorship from others? So I'm not a student. I'm just learning myself, and I want to see if I can get an opportunity to be mentored by you, by your company or your group.
Yeah, I think probably it's a little variable for each of us, again, depending on the program. For our program that works with HBCU students, that specifically is open to students at particular partner institutions. Our academic research mentorship program, though, anyone can apply who's, I think, new to open source is sort of the qualifier for that. So you don't have to be enrolled at a, academic institution to participate.
For the university partnership program right now, it's just the students that are taking the courses that we integrate with, but I'm always looking to make new relationships with more universities everywhere. And I also have had students come up to me after panels such as this one that have been like, I really want to get involved, but my university is not supportive. Is there any way we can figure something out? And usually I can introduce them to someone in the community that is willing to take them under their wing for a bit till they can confidently work on their own and then are just a fully fledged member of the community. So.
Yeah, we also partner with a variety of college and university programs, and that's where our partnership comes from. And I think that is a spot that we don't have, and I think programmatically we're not sure how to build a program where folks that are not in like student but also non-industry, but trying to get in how to accommodate those students and what that, like a structured program for those students, what the goals are. So we do get those requests, so we do think about that. Right now we do, what Kendall does is like, hey, put us in touch with your professors and we can build a relationship there and then get students in. But yeah, for individual students, it is hard to figure out how to build a successful program for them individually.
Yeah, and only thing I'll add, Code Day, we have in the past taken people individually who aren't students. We're not currently right now, but we may again soon. I believe that you're very passionate about that because you're here and you're asking about that. It's very hard to tell. Sometimes people will apply for things and then they'll just sort of drop out, and then that kind of ruins our relationships. So for, you know, the 20% of people that do that, it kind of ruins it for the other 80%. But I think that's something we're trying to figure out, is just how to make sure that the people are really accountable and actually have the time. But if we can do that again, we'd love to get more individual people in who aren't students. So, oh yeah, okay.
Well, I was just going to shout out, I just want to shout out a couple programs that are open to non-students. Google Summer of Code or GSOC is open to non-students. Again, it's just new contributors. So there's lots of different mentor organizations that work with Google Summer of Code to offer paid mentorship summer, or I think it's only summer opportunities. And then I don't know if it's changed, but I think at least at some point in time, MLH or Major League Hacking also offered, thank you for confirming, open source opportunities that are open to non-students in open source, or maybe I said that twice, but yes. So there are opportunities that are not student focused that we just aren't personally affiliated with, but please look into those, yes, because they're out there.
Cool. Thanks everyone so much for coming. I'm sure that most, if not all of us, would be happy to stick around and chat in the hallway a little bit more. So if people have more questions or things they want to talk about, we'd love to talk to you. Thanks everyone. I'm so glad to see so many people are excited about mentorship and open source, and I really appreciate you all for being here. So thank you.